Hey guys, Melvin here. Welcome to the attic. Today, we'll be reading a story from the RPG Horror Stories subreddit. This one was posted by user Shoe Owner. It's about a werewolf LARP that goes sideways under the purview of an Uber DM. Let's check it out. This was several years ago, in a Werewolf the Apocalypse LARP. Since I know that most of you won't be too familiar with the system or the lore, I'll be simplifying down a bunch of the concepts that are kind of extraneous to the thrust of the story anyway. I and a group of 2 other friends were invited to join a LARP game being run by an acquaintance of mine, whom I'd rather happily played with in a previous Werewolf LARP. The structure of this game, which was pretty common to Werewolf LARPs, was that there were several packs of characters in a large group, who would each have their individual adventures and such. And periodically there would be these big games where all the packs in the area got together for big events and such. Let's call the GM of the game Tribor. My 2 friends we'll call Dan and Brent. Tribor was unusually demanding. He required each and every player to submit a multi-page written character backstory, and had house rules that stated that all of our characters would be much less powerful and experienced than a basic starting character as per the published rules. At the time, the 3 of us were kind of suckered into the idea that someone who would ask so much of us would offer a commensurate reward in terms of an engaging game in return. I mean, who in their right mind would demand several pages of background text for each character if he wasn't planning on using it, right? How naive we were.
What?
Dan and Brent weren't naturally inclined towards writing where I was, so it kind of fell to me to do the lion's share of the writing for everyone. They came over to my place, and over the course of like 5 or 6 hours, with them sharing their ideas about their characters, I was able to come up with character backgrounds, which hit the necessary page count. We all sat down and tried to create character sheets which were at least minimally effective in spite of the gross limitations he'd put on us for character creation. Eventually we got it all done and sent it to Tribor. By this point we were all feeling pretty invested in our characters. We were playing a pack of bone gnawers, a tribe of kind of sleazy urban-dwelling wolves who had interbred with stray dogs and such, communing with the rats and crows and other wild creatures of the city. Over the course of the next couple of days, we hit up some thrift stores and bought costume pieces and roughed them up for the sake of our characters. We were in. Our introduction to the game was one which Tribor crafted to be pretty dramatic if somewhat unrewarding for us. There were one of these big meeting of the packs things going on, and he hadn't told other players that we were going to join the game. He arranged to meet us outside the game area midway through the session, and let us in so that the other players and characters could be surprised at the arrival of a new pack in the middle of their proceedings. A pretty cool idea in principle, but in practice, it meant that the 3 of us had to arrange our day around this game, and only actually get about an hour and a half of game time, arriving as we were when it was already more than halfway over. So, as the first game session impended, we met Tribor, who led us to the area out in the woods where the game would be taking place. Along the way, he told us about a conversation he'd had with one of the other players in this game, who'd asked him if there was an overall story. He had laughed with remembered disbelief at the very suggestion there might not be. Haha, what an absurd idea. Of course there was a central narrative, which he was using to guide events. Having heard that, going into this first session, I was reassured at the idea that nothing would just be arbitrary or meaningless. It was a good thing to be able to believe for a very short while. We made a big splash. Brent had brought a guitar with him, which he had what might be considered the most rudimentary skills with, but which was a pretty big part of his character's concept and story. As my character starts introducing our pack to the others, Brent whips out the guitar and starts riffing with it, and we fall into this awesome impromptu rhythm as he musically accompanies me in this kind of ballad of our character's story, told in character. Genuinely one of my fondest role-playing memories ever. The other players were absolutely delighted by our introduction.
Congratulations, you're officially part of the band.
When the game ended, we all had high hopes to develop this going forward. Again, it was nice to be able to believe that for the moment. Shortly thereafter, Tribor meets with the 3 of us for our first little adventure with the pack. A big part of the mythology of this game revolves around each tribe having a totemic god figure, typically though not always an animal god of some type, which is served and represented by various lesser and related spirits, which are a bit like angels in Christianity. They're not the same being as the god they serve, but they represent their interests and they're on the same page as their god. Our characters call upon one of these lesser totem spirits of our tribe's god to meet us and to essentially make a pact with us where we commit ourselves to its service in return for being shown around town, to get the lay of the land and be shown where we could do the most good in our god's name. In character, this was our character's way of making a good impression on the local spirits of our tribe. Out of character, this was us giving Tribor the opportunity to throw whatever plot hooks he wanted at us in order to catch us up in the big narrative he'd promised us existed. The spirit in question was called Mother Rat, which was basically the most caring, nurturing, and protective version of the rat god which our tribe served. We made our pact and were brought into the spirit world version of the city, whereupon we were led immediately into the most corrupt and dangerous area of the region. Almost immediately, our characters were assailed by this corrupt wyvern spirit who swooped down out of the sky and bit Dan and Brent's characters once each and then flew away into the air where we couldn't follow. Mother Rat immediately fled the scene, leaving us entirely without guidance or help. We were told that at the point where these bites were made, there was a rapidly spreading corruption of the flesh, and that where this corruption spread, Dan and Brent's characters lost control of their own bodies. We were in essence told that if this corruption spread across their entire bodies, that would be it for them, as they would just become these mindless monsters and effectively dead. For all intents and purposes, he'd inflicted a one-hit kill on 2 of them in the first round of the first combat of the first session of the campaign. My character leads them out of the spirit world into the physical world, where they emerge in the middle of the city. Despite our characters having been created at a much lower level than standard character creation, my character did have a ritual he could perform, simply called the Rite of Cleansing, which I reasoned might reverse this process. We break into the first unoccupied building I can find, a warehouse, so I can hastily start the rite and maybe save our lives. As I start the rite, we're told that the corrupted portions of their bodies start thrashing around and doing everything they can to interfere with the rite. I try securing them, tying them up, etc., but absolutely nothing works. We all agree the only thing to do is for my character to beat theirs into unconsciousness so I can complete the rite to save their lives, and I proceed to do so. Great, now the 2 of them are essentially out of the game without any agency whatsoever. I really hate this and tell Tribor I want to rush through this and get them back on their feet. Not so fast though. Our characters were spotted breaking in, and here's some cops to investigate their property crime. My character tries to evade them without luck, tries to subdue them without luck, and winds up having to kill them simply because my packmates are about to die and I don't have time to do anything slowly. Great. So I start the rite again, and miracle of miracles, manage to complete it. I'm told that the corruption begins to recede, but the 2 of them are going to be unconscious for hours. My character simply lacks any means to wake them up, and Tribor isn't willing to be flexible with the rules and let me splash some water in their faces to wake them up or anything. After being beaten into unconsciousness, the rules say that you're out for hours, and that's how it's going to be. It's at this point that a full police SWAT team arrives on site to investigate the last known location of the 2 cops that had gone missing. It's at this point that I was thinking, okay, darkest hour. Here comes the Deus Ex Machina, where Mother Rat finds some way to swoop in and save us from certain doom after abandoning us earlier. But no, it was not to be. My character, unwilling to betray his secret werewolf nature before so many police with body cameras and such, was forced to allow himself to be beaten into unconsciousness and subdued. He and his packmates taken into custody. We're told that we wake up in an interrogation room, not a police interrogation room, mind, but one hosted by the Men in Black, or the lore-specific derivation thereof, the Technocracy. After a brutal interrogation, we're gassed into unconsciousness and then told that our characters are executed in their sleep. In total, after the several hours which Tribor had us spend making our characters, we got to play them for about 4 hours, and for Dan and Brent, about 2 of those hours were spent with their characters unconscious, having been essentially defeated and taken out of action the first round of the first combat we saw. At this point, I had to ask Tribor, what in the was the point of all of this? How does any of this serve the story that you've got going on? Having our characters show up and just immediately be killed, out of the sight of the rest of the characters who would logically never even knew what happened to us. And then he gave me the most infuriating answer possible. He shrugged insouciantly, smirked, and said, "Well, here's the thing. There really isn't any story." As though I were a fool to ever believe otherwise. He was just flying by the seat of his pants without any advanced planning of any kind, and was without any narrative structure, despite his initial exasperated assurances as there absolutely was. Naturally, when he asked us about creating new characters for the next game session, we took a pass. I think one of the big lessons to learn from this story is RPGs are primarily about the players. As a GM, you serve the game by creating interesting and rewarding experiences for them, and letting your players feel like they have actual agency while playing. Something to take away for all of us GMs. Thank you for joining me for this story, here in the attic. Please like the video if you had a good time, and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Alright y'all, please take care of yourselves out there. This is Melvin, in the attic, signing out.